This conference will now be recorded.
That answers my question. Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Payne. I'm chair. I'd like to say is November 2nd, 2021. Meeting of the Vancouver Transportation and Mobility Commission is now come to order. Julie, would you please take roll for us?
Sure. Just a moment. Had to minimize some things. Okay. Commissioner Edwards.
Present.
Commissioner Godsill, who we think is joining shortly. Commissioner Herman.
Present.
Commissioner Hubert.
Here.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Raya.
Mario, are you with us?
I am.
There you are. Great.
Thanks. Commissioner Ramos.
Oh, I had my camera off. Sorry.
Eduardo, can you hear us?
Okay, yes, I was confused. It sounded like Ruggles to me, but yes, I am here.
Great. Thank you. And next, Commissioner Ruggles.
And I'm here too, thank you.
Great. Commissioner Williams.
Here.
And Chair Payne.
Did we not get Godsoul? Commissioner Godsoul join us yet?
No, I don't think he's on yet. I'm going to send him a message right now.
We'll proceed, and Julie will work to contact Commissioner Godsill and make sure he's not having any connection problems. But we're going to keep going, and we'll do what we need to do on the back end.
Absolutely. So the excusal of absence, we will. We're going to allow him an excuse because I think we're going to get a hold of him before this meeting's over. Anyone for a motion for excusal of absences?
I think actually, why don't we wait and we'll just.
You want to do that at the end of the meeting? Okay, we'll do that at the end of the meeting.
Chalk this up. We'll just chalk this up to probably technical difficulties, and we'll work with him if that is okay with you, Chair.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks.
So moving right along, everybody was provided a copy of the minutes. First off, welcome to our new commissioners. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're stepping up and joining us. There will be a moment of official introductions here in just a moment. But I wanted to at least point out we are going to ask for a motion to introduce the minutes, the approval of the minutes for September. As most of you know, we did not have a meeting in October, and most of our members were not present, so they will be excused from vote. So I would like to request a motion for the approval of the September minutes.
This is Commissioner Ruggles, and I so move.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Herman. I second.
Thank you. Julie, could you please take a vote on that?
Yes. Commissioner Edwards.
Jane.
And Commissioner Godsill, who's still joining. Commissioner Herman.
Yes.
Commissioner Hubert.
Abstain. I think we're supposed to abstain because we're new.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Jackson.
I think I also need to abstain. I was not there.
Commissioner Raya.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramos.
Yes.
Commissioner Ruggles.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
And Chair Payne.
Yes.
Great. And I also saw that Connor was able to join.
Welcome, Connor. So with that, the motion passes for the approval of the minutes for September. Thank you, everyone. With that said, I would like to hand the floor over to staff. We have some introduction and comments from staff in regards to our departure of past members and introduction of some new members. So, Rebecca, if you would be so kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Payne. And so we are at the time of year for this board and commission when we will transition from outgoing to incoming members. We will always typically do this in November as it corresponds with the appointment dates of different members. I will note that right now we're a 10-member commission, and we are still in recruitment for a one more commissioner. Through the last recruitment process, appointee was not identified, and so we'll be re-advertising and going back out for that. And we should have someone hopefully by January, if not February. So just really quick, I want to take a minute to thank our outgoing commissioners. We weren't able to do this in October, and my apologies for that. Typically, we will do that and have a thank you at folks' last meeting, and we will know in advance when that will be, and we'll also know who our new members will be at that time. So we'll have sort of an overlap and a handing off from outgoing to incoming members. I want to first and foremost thank Michelle Thana, who served as vice chair for the inaugural year of this commission. Very much appreciate her stepping up into the vice chair role and her participation in the first year of the commission. I also want to acknowledge the time, effort, and commitment of all the outgoing members, in addition to former Vice Chair Thana. That includes Chuck Frere, who represented the disability community on that seat, Carson Valenta, who represented the youth appointee, and Teresa Hardy, who represented, I believe, our at-large seat. I just want to take a minute to say that it was a very productive and engaging first year. It was also a challenging one in the sense that we were all trying to kind of get our sea legs under us and figure out how to work together. And we did that all without having a single in-person meeting. So want to thank the outgoing members as well as all of you for your time, energy, commitment, feedback, participation, and willingness to serve in what is a fairly demanding citizen oversight role, and whose work will ramp up in 2022. We were very grateful for your service, as I know the council is, and just want to thank those outgoing members in particular for the contribution for the first year. And then I am very, very pleased to welcome 3 new members to the commission, Jean Ann Edwards, Alex Hubert, and Connor Godsill. They are representing the at-large, the transportation, someone who works, a driver, someone who represents drivers, and then the youth appointee. And just to note for everybody that those are now 3-year terms, with the exception of the youth appointee, which is always a 1-year term, in recognition of the sort of unique attributes of that seat. So want to thank all our new members as well for your willingness to serve and for going through the application process. We're very happy to have you and welcome you to the commission. And note that, again, as we did in our onboarding, that staff as well as other commissioners are here to support you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Julie Nishik, or Chair Payne as needed. If you have any questions and don't know where to go for answers, that's me and Julie Nishik. We're here to be a primary resource for you. So welcome to our new members, and thank you again to our outgoing members. Look forward to another very productive year.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I'd like to just, maybe mimic what she said. I really appreciate the time and the commitment that each of you have made to this commission. We look forward to a new year. We look forward to welcoming the new commission members and seeing the transition go smooth and what we're about to accomplish for the new year. With that said, moving down on the agenda for the evening, we do have a...
Maybe I could just, sorry to interrupt you, but I do think we skipped the reading of the remote meeting, or sorry, the reading of the remote meeting preamble. And if you don't mind, I think, if you don't mind leading that and then turning it over, that'd be great.
Not only will I read that, but we'll also, since we do have Connor here, I guess we can take a motion for, there won't, I guess, be a motion needed for any excusable absences. So we can pass up on that also. With that said, I shall read the preamble. The role of the Transportation Mobility Commission is to review and analyze transportation projects, policy changes, program development, and other transportation matters affecting the public right-of-way. We follow a public process, including voting on action items during which the public has an opportunity to provide additional perspectives and information. In legislative matters, the role of the Commission is advisory. The Planning Commission may hold separate meetings to consider our recommendations and provide their own. City Council may also hold separate meetings to consider our recommendations and make final determinations. During tonight's meeting, please do not use the chat box for public comment. Comments made in the chat box are not included in the public record. Commission members will not comment on or take into consideration any comments made in the chat box. There are two primary functions for the chat box alone. First off, for staff to coordinate with you if you signed up for public comment, and second, to notify staff if you're having any technical issues. The Transportation and Mobility Commission will conduct a meeting tonight and take public comments during designated times. Callers who have pre-registered by noon on the Transportation and Mobility Commission survey page will be called upon to address the Transportation and Mobility Commission at that time. When you are called, please make sure your phone or your microphone is unmuted and your video is on so that your face can be seen during your testimony. At that time, please state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes for your comments. At the conclusion of your 3 minutes, please mute yourself and turn off your camera. If you're providing the formal recommendation of a neighborhood association or any other group, please tell us when the association voted on the matter, as well as how many people were for and against said matter. Please keep remarks brief and to the point. Remarks should be directed to the Transportation and the Mobility Commission as a body, not the audience or staff. Please do not repeat comments that have already been provided in print or verbally, and please show respect for the people commenting tonight, whether or not you agree with their comments. So with that said, moving on to the agenda, we do have an informational item here, and I would like Rebecca, if you would please introduce our speaker tonight.
Great. Thank you, Chair Payne. Yeah, I want to just introduce Chris Malone, who's our Public Works Finance and Asset Manager, and who manages the annual update of the Transportation Improvement Program. Just a little bit of framing here. So the TMC saw the Transportation Improvement Program, or our TIP program, last year for the first time, as it was your first year. I acknowledge that I think we had some group learning through that, which was needed to bring this to you earlier in the process and provide more of a multi-touch process for you all to engage in this. Our Transportation Improvement Program is our 6-year transportation program. It's required by the state, and we update it every single year. So right now we're starting the process for updating it in 2022 to create our 2023 through 28 6-year TIP. I also want to note that Mr. Malone is going to walk through a high level of what the Transportation Improvement Program is, and we'll retouch on some issues that were discussed earlier this year for the past update. And this is the first of a couple different touches with the Transportation and Mobility Commission. This is the introductory workshop. We are anticipating, and Chris can elaborate on this, at least one more workshop prior to a hearing and a vote that would send a recommendation to council. So again, want to frame this up as an early touch. We want to get your feedback, input, questions so that we can come back early next year and address those with you and integrate them into the document as appropriate before getting you a first draft for another round of review. And Chris will walk through this. But again, this is the first touch on this for the annual update that is forthcoming. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Malone. Chris, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Rebecca. And as we go through this presentation, feel free to join in if I miss something, Rebecca, and we'll try to answer any questions that we can from the commission members. So good afternoon, commission members. As Rebecca said, my name is Chris Malone, Public Works Finance and Asset Manager. Next slide, please, Julie. As far as the presentation overview, we'll do a quick refresher on the Transportation Improvement Program since there are some new commission members, and then we'll also talk about how projects get into the document, the TIP document, and then ultimately into the construction phase. We'll touch on some of the feedback we've received from the commission already and remind folks of that. And then we'll look at some projects that we're proposing to add to next year's document. And then we'll touch base on the interim project prioritization process for the scoring of projects. Next slide, please. And as Rebecca mentioned, kind of a first touch point, the last slide in this presentation, we have kind of a proposed tentative schedule to meet with the commission members, probably 2 more times, we're hoping. And so again, this is like a first time to meet with the commission members and get some feedback in preparation of a first draft of the document. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as a refresher on the actual document, so as Rebecca said, it's a 6-year lookout of projects that our transportation department is proposing to construct. And as folks may be aware, we have a long-term transportation system plan that is kind of our 20-year vision of what we want our Vancouver streets to look like. And then we have a biennial budget that's adopted every 2 years that is more immediate and shows what money we're going to spend in the next 2 years. So this 6-year planning implementation document helps kind of bridge that gap between the 20-year planning document and then the 2-year biennial budget. So that's part of the reason that we create the document. The document itself includes a lot of stuff, which I'll get into, but as Rebecca had said, it is required by state law. The law requires just a list of projects, and the law also requires that the document, the TIP document, be adopted by the end of June each year. The city tries to go above and beyond what the law requires in an effort to be accountable and transparent to the public. So we include a lot of information about our finances. We try to give a lot more detailed information about specific projects if folks are interested in that. So I'll touch base a little bit more on that later in the presentation, but just wanted folks to be aware that there's a state law and we try to go above what the law requires. As part of the process each year, we do public outreach. We reach out to multiple neighborhood associations, the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Alliance. We utilize social media. We utilize the city's website. And then we also have meetings with the Transportation Mobility Commission as well as City Council that are televised. And then also as Rebecca said, the commission is the primary citizen oversight committee for reviewing and recommending action to our city council. And so that's part of the reason that we come before you with this process. Next slide, please. So that's kind of why we do the Transportation Improvement Program. This is more about the document itself and what's included. The document, as I talked about, has a front end portion of the document that has our high-level comprehensive plan policies and strategic goals that the city operates under when we talk about our transportation department. And then we also have like a letter from the director kind of introducing things that were accomplished, goals for the coming year. And then we have that financial section that I had mentioned that looks at historic expenses and revenues as well as forecasted expenses and revenues. And then we get to the project lists themselves, which is the part that's required by state law. And then after the project lists, there's detail sheets for each specific project. So if someone's interested in a specific project, they can go to those detail sheets and look at a map of where the project is. There's a project description, schedule, costs, etc. As far as the project lists, there's 3 different lists. There's a funded list, a partially funded list, and an unfunded list. The funded list includes projects that have full funding to take it through the construction phase. partially funded projects are ones that have money for design and or right-of-way acquisition, but not the full funding required to take it through the construction phase. And then the unfunded list is the list of projects that don't have money allocated at this time. So there's a lot of different types of projects included in the document. There's major arterial improvement type projects, there's bicycle projects, there's pedestrian improvement projects, traffic signals, complete streets. And in the next slide, I'll talk about how projects make their way into the document. But one thing I want to point out is the last bullet on this slide is that in order for projects to qualify for state or federal grant opportunities, the granting agencies require that a project be listed on the adopted TIP document. So important if we want to go after grant opportunities that those projects are listed in our document. Next slide, please. This is kind of a diagram showing how projects make their way into the TIP, and then how after it gets into the TIP, how it makes its way through the design phase and then into construction. So there's a lot of things that feed into the TIP to help projects get into it. There's our high-level transportation system plan, the 20-year plan that I had mentioned. We also have multiple sub-area and corridor plans that have been adopted, and within those sub-area plans are transportation projects are identified that then get put into the TIP document. Also, in addition to that, we get feedback from citizens, from the development community when someone develops property. Oftentimes, needs within the transportation system are identified. Also, our staff, just on the daily operating of our roadway systems, finds new needs that get entered into the document. And then also coordinating with other agencies, for example, WashDOT or with Clark County or CTRAN. They also, in those interagency workings, the projects are identified and added to the TIP through that as well. So a lot of ways that projects make their way into the document. Once they're in the document, then staff looks for ways to fund those projects. And so oftentimes grants are a key funding component to get projects built. And oftentimes our large arterials are funded through large grants, but also a lot of our sidewalk and bicycle type improvements are funded through granting opportunities as well. We also have ongoing funding programs that have a dedicated pot of money each year to accomplish specific goals. Some examples of that are like our paving program. We have a dedicated pot of money each year to accomplish paving improvements. Also multimodal, so there's a pot of money to achieve bicycle and pedestrian improvements through the city. The same with signals and lighting, there's money set aside for that, and then also sidewalk improvements. So as the project gets more and more funding, it moves through the different phases. So first a project gets designed, and then right-of-way is acquired to install the improvements, and then it goes to the construction phase. And sometimes it takes a long time, especially for the large arterial type projects. Those could be decades from the time they get put into the TIP document to the time they're constructed. So those large projects take a long time. And then there's the other end of the spectrum. There's projects that are smaller in scale, like for example, restriping of a street that may be able to happen fairly quickly because there's a paving project that provides a clean slate when they repave the road that allows for a restriping project to improve, like for example, bicycle safety along the street. So that kind of gives you maybe an idea of how projects get into the TIP and then how they make their way through design and right-of-way and then ultimately to the construction phase. So the next part of the presentation gets more into the projects themselves. And I wanted to just take a little moment to pause and allow the commission members to ask questions about the TIP document itself, the process of why we do the TIP or how we create it. Is there any questions before we move into project specifics?
Well, Chris, I have a couple of questions about criteria, but I don't know if you'd like me to address that now or later on.
Yeah, there'll be another stopping point in the presentation where we'll get into project-specific scoring and the criteria. So this is more high level if you have questions about the document or why we do it or things like that.
Actually, I do about outreach. May I ask you that?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned that the public outreach, that we go to the NTSA, the neighborhood, city council, and social media. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the social equity piece, what else we can be doing, because there are a lot of people that would fit into the social equity lens that are not going to necessarily be showing up at neighborhood meetings. So are there other plans for outreach that are more like feet on the street, safely face-to-face, being able to go where people actually are that might be experiencing the inequity?
Yeah, we can certainly do that, and we have tried that in the past. We've actually gone out to different locations, the mall, transit centers, et cetera. And to be honest, we just never got good feedback from people. We didn't have good success with it in the past, so we kind of stopped doing it. But I will say it's something that we could consider moving forward. And I also want to add that our individual projects, once they're in the design phase, there's a lot of public outreach where we go to affected neighbors and citizens out there that are nearby the project, and there's a lot of public outreach, and there's lots of different methods that they use at the project level to get the word out to vulnerable communities and everyone that might be affected.
So we have some ideas about how to do that for the future as well then?
This is Rebecca.
With regards to specific.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. Gary, yeah, I think what we would be looking for is if it is the entire commission's direction, some direction to say, hey, we would like a more concerted effort to reach vulnerable populations to be part of the outreach for this. That's something you all could say tonight. I would just say that like a number of the inputs into the TIP, so the transportation system plan, the strategic plan, different sub-area and corridor plans, have extensive outreach processes themselves that specifically have strategies for reaching vulnerable communities. And so where those plans are feeding into the TIP, they are reflecting that feedback already. So I think we can provide more information on what has been done in the past related to those inputs. We also obviously would like to hear from the commission if they think more should be done in this area. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to cut you off, but please go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Commissioner Payne?
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I saw you. Go ahead.
I don't know, send up a flare? I'm not sure how to.
Thank you.
While I am empathetic to what Commissioner Ruggles is discussing with her concerns there's a practical aspect to this as well. And people that want to have input should be given an opportunity to get input. Many times people just aren't interested in giving input. And I mean, you have to use all reasonable means to do it, but I'd like to emphasize that the means need to be reasonable. We can't expect, as an example, to have people go door to door. That would be impractical. So I think my experience in the past is that when I was on the City of Vancouver Planning Commission with things of this nature, not specifically in transportation, of course, but things were published. There were flyers put out. There were things put on the website. There were, quite a few outreach methods that were used to get input. And many times people just weren't that interested, to be honest, in giving input. They just wanted to roll along with things. When someone becomes passionate about something, they'll show up to a meeting like this and voice their concern. So again, I'm in favor of various methodologies of outreach, but we have to be reasonable about it and temper our expectations to those that are interested in participating in the process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Ray. Commissioner Herman?
Hi. Thank you for the information. Regarding kind of the vulnerable communities, there's been some great work that's been done as part of the transportation systems plan that vulnerable communities have been mapped out. Perhaps in addition to the tip, in addition to all of the information that goes along with it, maybe there could be mapping that shows these projects in relation to those neighborhoods so that communities have a greater chance of expressing outreach and getting more engaged in the projects themselves.
If I could answer that, we have actually created that map. That actually gets into kind of the scoring criteria that I'll touch on a little bit later. But yeah, we have mapped the vulnerable communities and then overlaid our street work on top of that. So we do have that information.
Speaking also to that effect, from a neighborhood association, member of my local neighborhood association, Commissioner Ruggles, we do share that information, and I know that several of the other neighborhood associations do try to get the word out, within their local neighborhoods as well. But did anyone else have any questions? Any of the new commissioner members? If you haven't, this would be a great opportunity. If there's anything that you have a question on before we proceed. Commissioner Edwards?
Mine's not a question as much as I am interested to see how we look at the vulnerable population and bring it in. I mean, as most of us know, the vulnerable population is frequently the transportation ties in so much into what access they have and what they're able to do. And we know historically a lot of things that have happened with transportation. So I don't necessarily have a question, but I am really interested in how we are looking that lens as we're developing TIP and how other plans that are going into it, if they've already looked at those issues or if that's something that we need to take at that point.
If I may, Chair, I think just to summarize what we're hearing on this topic, I think it sounds like the Commission would like to see some more specific information about what projects are located in census block groups that have been identified as vulnerable based on our citywide vulnerability index, which is consistent with what is being proposed to the TSP as well. So we can do that, and I think we can come back with that. And then I think we could also provide some more information about within those areas and looking at those projects, where has previous outreach been done as part of larger planning projects to help give the Commission some confidence that those in fact came out of processes already completed, but processes that engage diverse communities in the discussion and in fact reflect their feedback as part of those processes. So I think we could do both at the next workshop if that is something the Commission would like to see. And it looks like Commissioner Jackson also may have a comment on that.
Yes, I'm just wondering, have we done a presentation at the library before? Because in my experience, the library seems to bring in a diverse part of the population.
I can say that we haven't done a TIP presentation at the library, but we do go to the library for our project-specific outreach.
Great suggestion, actually. Anyone else before we move along?
Well, Commissioner Payne, I would just add that I'm sure there's a lot of partner organizations, and definitely having the fullness of reaching those vulnerable populations is something I would love to see. So I'm sure there's probably some partner organizations out there that help with these vulnerable populations that Commissioner Edwards just brought up.
Yes, that is correct. And we, again, through sort of like some of the inputs into this reflect partnership outreach with community-based organizations that serve different communities. I do think one area, again, where we could look to bring back, we could look to do more and then bring back a proposal, or the result of that is how we actually get information out about the tip through those partner organizations. I think we tend to engage folks more on like, because community members typically don't necessarily want to engage in a RCW required 6-year list. They want to engage on the sidewalk or the bus stop that they use. It's typically reflected more in those more geographically specific planning processes that feed into the tip. So I think, again, this is a part where we can do both, right? It's both and. So we can tell you more about that to give the commission confidence about those previous efforts and who they got involved. And I think we can do more to distribute the tip, educate people about what it means, and bring that back to you as well.
Thank you. And I will just end. I'm going to stop now, but I'm just going to say that I was responding to Chris's list, which was NTSA, neighborhood, city council, and social media. So all of these other elements that we're bringing in and that Commissioner Edwards talked about were not mentioned. And so, that's why I would love to have a more comprehensive idea of how that is being done. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear you.
Thank you. Chris, the floor is yours.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we get into the more project-specific discussions about the projects in the TIP. And what we heard back from the commission a while ago was there's the way that the projects are categorized right now are capacity, which are like our large arterial improvement type projects, signal projects, multimodal projects. And we heard from the commission that it'd be good if we could clarify or rename them to provide more clarity on what they mean. And so what we're proposing is to change the name of the categories, not significantly. The capacity category would change to arterial improvements, signal would change to signal and lighting, multimodal would change to multimodal improvements, and then we're proposing to add a new category called complete streets. And then another item that we heard from the commission previously is to add a project for sidewalks along 10th Street between Ellsworth and Chocolaw. Next slide, please. As far as projects that are proposed to be added to the next year's version of the TIP, we have some unfunded projects as well as some partially funded projects. So on the unfunded list, we have the 10th Street sidewalk project I just mentioned. Also a complete street project along St. James and St. John's. And then another complete street project along McGilvery Boulevard. And then there's two projects that cross over Interstate 5 at 29th Street and 33rd Street. And those will both be impacted by the proposed Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. So we're coordinating with the state agencies on how those streets could be improved as part of the I-5 Bridge Replacement Project. Then on the partially funded list, we have a complete street project.
I have a question. I'm
along
sorry.
Fort Vancouver Way that has some. Sure.
This is Williams here. On the 33rd Street, about 4 or 5 years ago, a group of us were told that that the extent of bike paths was going to go all the way from, gosh, where is it? Lincoln or Kaufman, wherever it starts out in the west, and would go out past St. John's to the east. So does this encompass that whole thing, or is it just across the I-5 bridge?
Well, I can take that one, Chris. It essentially is, we know there are going to be improvements made to 33rd Street as part of the Interstate 5 bridge. So we would propose to create a larger project so that so essentially we address that entire corridor, and we have to the extent possible with the existing roadway, obviously won't all be replaced, but that we're creating a consistent multimodal access through there, including addressing Commissioner Williams, the issues related to the bike lanes not being consistent through there. So that's what is being proposed. Similarly, I'll just say, because we're on at 29th Street, there's going to be improvements there. We think that will lend itself not to a complete street necessarily, which includes improvements for folks, biking, walking, rolling, taking transit, and using mobility devices, and also often includes things like additional street trees, new lighting. But we think there's kind of a low-hanging fruit opportunity on 29th, which is a largely neighborhood street, to create a greenway or a bikeway, which is a traffic calm shared street for bikes, that would really emphasize and build off of that new connection, that improved connection that the bridge project will create, the proposed bridge project will likely create if it's approved and funded. So that's kind of but you're absolutely right on 33rd. It's essentially to make good on the commitments of 33rd Street and look at that whole corridor, but also take advantage of what will likely happen to the bridge.
Thank you.
And Chair Payne,
Okay,
it looks like Commissioner Rea has a question here too, Chris.
So I'm confused. There's already a sidewalk on 10th Street between Ellsworth and Checkloff on the south side of the street.
Yeah, that's not on the north side, which is where the apartments. That's where why the kids have to take a bus to go to Ellsworth Elementary, which is about 500 feet away because there's no sidewalk on the north.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, so continue on for partially funded projects. There's some design money set aside to start the design for the Fort Vancouver Way Complete Street project. There's some money set aside to start design on 112th Avenue Complete Street project. And it should be noted that there already is an arterial improvement project proposed. It's in the unfunded list for 112th Avenue, but that arterial project is going to be a very expensive project because there's lane widening involved and have to buy a lot of right-of-way along the corridor to make it safer for all modes. So this is a shorter term project and with an effort to try to make it safer for bikes and peds in the interim until a larger corridor project can come along. And then there's a project along Southeast 34th Street on the east side of the city between 164th and 192nd to make that a complete street for bicyclists and pedestrians as well. Next slide, please. Okay, as a refresher for the commission members, this was the criteria that we had used for the interim prioritization. So in last year's document, we had prioritized and scored our transportation projects based on these criteria is on an interim basis. And we call it interim because we knew that the transportation system plan was underway. And as part of the transportation system plan, they were doing a lot of public outreach, and they would revamp the scoring and change things as necessary to reflect the community's wants and needs. So, but as part of the interim process, these are the criteria that we had used. And these are based on the comprehensive plan policies that the city has adopted, as well as the strategic goals that the city adopted. And those criteria were safety, equity, multimodal, climate, asset management, economic development, and congestion. And then city staff added this viability criteria as well. So when you look at each criteria, some of the information we use to score the projects, when you look at safety, we had done a citywide safety analysis recently. And so we were scoring projects based on accident history that were associated with that citywide safety study. That was the way we scored those projects. For equity, we had a map, a draft version of a vulnerability map that we overlaid our transportation projects on. And since last year's version, the vulnerability map has been updated. And so that is one revision that we're going to have to do this next coming update to the document, is utilize the updated map and overlay the projects on that map to rescore them based on the new equity criteria. And then we had multimodal, which included our bicycle, pedestrian, and transit route as a scoring criteria. Our climate, we used our National Environmental Protection Act as well as our State Environmental Protection Act mitigation measures as a criteria. Asset management, we scored projects based on what infrastructure they were replacing that was failing. We also scored projects on economic development based on if they were on an arterial or in a sub-area plan. And then we also scored projects based on congestion for concurrency and demand management and freight route opportunities. And then the project viability looked at, is there existing grant funding? Are we coordinating with other agencies? Kind of those other things that weren't necessarily in our comprehensive plan policies, but is important when you look at a transportation project. Next slide, please. So knowing that the TSP is coming and that's the outreach associated with the TSP is still ongoing, and it won't be done by June of 2022. So, and that's, if you recall, that's the date that by state law we're supposed to adopt the next version of our document. So we're going to have an interim scoring again. But knowing that the TSP will be revamping everything in the future, and in 2023 we'll be able to utilize the scoring of the TSP, what we'd like to ask the commission is, are there some minor tweaks that we can do now, knowing that we don't want to invest a lot of resources in something that's going to become obsolete once the TSP gets adopted? Are there minor tweaks that we can implement now to improve the scoring process? And at this point, I'd like to open it up to the commission members to offer comments either on the projects that are being proposed to be added or about the interim scoring criteria and any tweaks that might be recommended based for those.
Sorry, Commissioner Jackson.
You may have sort of answered this, but on the last slide, slide 9, one of the things as I was reading it kept coming back to me is that I didn't see public transit listed anywhere on there. So are you slipping that in with multimodal, or is transit a separate kind of thing? Because as I'm going through each of the projects, I'm looking at the different sheets that are directly involved with transit. It's a two-part question. I'm looking at those, asking myself, well, are we getting some funding for those from CTRAN or from the federal government to assist with things like bus rapid transit changes, like the fiber, aerial fiber removal and such? So I kind of feel like transit should maybe have a place in there.
Yeah, so CTRAN gets their own funding for things like the BRT, but we do coordinate with them on improvements. So like when they do a BRT corridor, they work with us to design the stop locations and the design of the stops themselves. And as far as scoring, yeah, the multimodal criteria has points for transit improvements, but also the congestion, because demand management, transit is a component of demand management. So it gets factored into the scoring there.
Okay, because it would be nice to see the word transit somewhere on the prioritization on the data set, but also I am kind of curious because it looks like we're spending a considerable amount of money to remove the overhead fibers for the bus rapid transit, and it kind of feels as if I'm just curious if some of the money that is for bus rapid transit is coming to us as a city so that we can do those upgrades for C-Tran.
I can take that one, Chris, if you want.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is admittedly a complex regulatory and statutory environment, but basically C-Trans improvements and the work that they do are included in the regional transportation, like 6-year transportation plan, as are those of a lot of other public agencies. And essentially the improvements that C-Tran will make, even on the city system, are their improvements, right? So they're not giving us money to upgrade our fiber. They are upgrading it as part of a project that receives federal funding and has a whole other set of sort of statutory requirements to meet. I do think so. I would say I'm not sure that we want to, as part of this year's update, open up adding all their transit projects to this list, but I do think through the TSP we might want to consider that. I think that could be a recommendation that comes out of the TSP, which is like, how can we better integrate transit projects into our TIP, and at what level is appropriate given this sort of a little bit complex environment we're working in. And one reason I think we will be able to do that in a much more rational and sort of logical way post TSP is we will have an enhanced transit corridors plan that's a portion of the TSP scope, which will identify areas where we need to do work on local roads to facilitate fast, reliable, efficient, accessible transit. And so I think that's potentially an update for the following year when we have that policy framework from council to integrate. I think you make a really good point though. If it's not multimodal, it probably should be somewhere. And we just haven't done the work to identify like that comprehensive set of city street improvements that will facilitate transit and the way that we need to do it this year is what I would sort of recommend.
Yeah, it feels like it would help drive the conversation. So
yeah, no, totally agree. You're spot on. And I think we'll have that in 2023 or 2022 when we start updating the 24-29 tip, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Commissioner Williams, I believe you were next.
Yeah, on the prioritization things, I'm thinking on the climate ones. I quick look through that, the RCW that described that, the Environmental Protection Act. Well, on a quick read of that, I saw darn precious little regarding climate in it explicitly. It's much more kind of traditional wetlands, endangered species, and so on and so on. Although important, is not really climate related. I don't know how easy it is to make an estimate of, you do a project and we anticipate emissions to go down by 11% or whatever. That to me is the nub of what climate impact is about. And the scoring that I see doesn't address it. It kind of goes around it. In a general sense, a lot of the things I'm seeing in this prioritization from decades of experience, yes, no questions are extremely poor way of organizing things. They don't communicate much. For example, 100 feet of sidewalk is deemed just as valuable as 100 miles because it's a yes, no. So a digital decision making is not something that my experience tells me is useful, and a more continuous function is better. On multimodal, there's a couple of things that were bothering me. Right to the point of it is, well, first off, I have been looking for a long time for what is our system plan for alternate micromobility, whatever, where are the arterials to be, so then we can or, oh, here's a missing link. I did find a map in my files, undated. I'm guessing is probably from about 2016. With future bike connections and things like that, which have been pretty ill addressed in the last 5 or 6 years. That to me is a big hole that we've got, is it's a coherent, cohesive plan to what we want. It's more of a TSP thing, I guess, a proper map. So it wasn't clear quite how you value a 1 mile of critical link. To me is more valuable than 2 miles out somewhere that doesn't link anything else. Then another thought is there a way of using, I think the jargon is a level of stress. Is it a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale or something like that, where, riding.
That's correct, level of stress.
So right now, riding on 164th Avenue in the traffic is, I would say, stressful. Riding on the Burnt Bridge Creek Trail is highly agreeable. Is there a way you can utilize the change in level of stress due to a project going from a 1 to a 2 or a 1 to a 3 or what have you as a method of scoring on the multi? And with that, I will be quiet.
Chair Payne, may I, because really, really good points there, and I think I can probably maybe bring some clarity to where the city organization is at on some of that. The first is that we are in the process of developing a climate action plan. That, right, as of right now, the council has identified a aspirational goal of being net zero GHG emissions by 2040. That will have a tremendous impact on our transportation priorities. Transportation is the largest creator of greenhouse gases in our city. It will have a tremendous impact on other aspects as well as our land use and built environment, but will have a very big impact on transportation. The challenge for us in updating the TIP annually is that we don't have that policy direction yet. And so I think Commissioner Williams, an interim potential ranking of looking at what especially on mobility, like multimodal projects, an interim sort of additional scoring criteria of what projects will do for level of stress for multimodal infrastructure and non-driving mobility in a corridor is something we can look at how we can incorporate. I agree with you that NEPA and SEPA mitigations are not adequate really to address climate. The challenge for us is we do not have a policy foundation to work from and cannot get in advance of our council. We certainly will share when we go to them that that the TMC is interested, has raised this point, thinks we should do this, and eagerly awaits their climate action plan. But that is sort of, we have to have that policy foundation in order to integrate it into this. I do think level of stress is a good way, and so we can look at that. We will look at how we can maybe add that into the multimodal ranking. And then also just want to say, you were absolutely correct. We have no coherent plan for micromobility. Part of that is because our transportation system plan is from 2004 and there wasn't any micromobility. Well, there probably was, but there wasn't micromobility as we know it today. And so one of the elements of the TSP, as you know, is working through essentially creating what you're asking for is a coherent policy and network to serve micromobility going forward, understanding it'll be a component of the transportation system. So all good points, we're with you. And some of it is just probably we can't do it this year because we don't have that policy foundation and our council's working through it, but certainly post TSP, post adoption of the climate action plan, we can and will have to do it. And it'll be brought back before you all. Go ahead.
One final clarification question is, when you have these points, tallied up for a project, I seem to remember you just kind of take, okay, here's the project with the highest number of points, or do you normalize it by the cost of the project? going for the biggest bang for the buck. I wasn't clear which way you went on that.
Well, keep in mind, this is interim, and so really all these projects have been in the pipeline for years already. So the scoring doesn't really affect what's happening with the projects right now. It was just a way to look at some criteria in the interim to help drive the conversation with the TSP. And so as of right now, it's not really driving decision making per se, but once the TSP scoring comes into play, then it will start to affect decisions on specific projects. So for now, it's more just like informational and to look at ways that we could improve the scoring for projects. But I would say that that's a good recommendation, is instead of just looking at pure points, that you factor in points per dollar or dollar per points, whatever, to factor in the cost of the project. And also another thing that I just wanted to mention is we need to find a balance between subjectivity and objectivity. So when we talk about stress, I think that would be a hard criteria for people to score, especially when there's not a facility in place. So it'd be hard to say how much stress it would relieve. So when you talk about trying to score a project, try to think of objective criteria. And to your point about 100 miles is more important than 100 feet, I agree with that. And so maybe a way to factor in that would be you get a certain point value for 0 to 50 feet, and then a certain point value for 0 to a quarter mile, and then another point value for 0.5 miles to a mile. So those are just things to think about, and especially like Rebecca said, through the TSP process and in future revisions of the scoring, that we could use objective scoring, but still meet the ideas that you guys are throwing out.
Thank you.
So to keep a little bit mindful of our agenda, I would like to hear from Commissioner Ruggles and Commissioner Herman before we go to break. Commissioner Rea, you'll be in third place. Commissioner Ruggles, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Real quick, Chris, can you talk a little bit more, please, about the Equity Vulnerability Index for the new map?
Yeah, so we actually have, I don't know how difficult it would be to bring up, but we do have the map that's would be used for the next version of scoring. And I'll try to briefly explain this, and Rebecca, you can chime in if I get something wrong. But what this map is doing is it's taking a city average.
Sorry, if you want, Shannon's on the line.
Oh, well, let me explain. I'll try to do it in simplified terms, and then if I miss something, you guys can expand on it. But what I think is happening here is the intent of the map is to look at the citywide average in certain categories, and if a percentage of a certain category is higher than the city average, then it's considered a higher vulnerability. And then they layer those categories on top of each other. And so you see what's most vulnerable versus not as vulnerable. And the categories that they use are communities of color, people holding less than a bachelor's degree, renter populations, populations age 65 and older, households with children, and median family income. And so basically if it's higher than the city average, then it's considered more vulnerable. Is there anything that you want to add, Shannon?
No, I think you actually did a pretty good job, but I'm happy to answer questions if that's not clear to folks.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I did. On slide 7 of you go through the different naming conventions as well as you added a new category. You renamed one multimodal, and then you added complete streets. What's the difference between the two?
In my mind, I'll let Rebecca chime in if I miss something here, but in my mind, the difference is multimodal could just be a sidewalk improvement, or it could just be a bike improvement, but a complete street is kind of trying to improve the street for all users. Is there anything you want to add, Rebecca?
So all users could also be vehicles.
Yes, that's
It does
correct.
include vehicles.
Okay.
Yeah, so for instance, a complete streets project that we do that includes paving, restriping, signal improvements would benefit vehicles, but likely also includes ADA curb ramp upgrades, mobility lane investments, protected mobility lanes potentially. And note that I'm saying mobility lanes and not bike lanes, because mobility lanes serve folks using, as to Commissioner Williams' point, serve folks using micromobility, serve folks using mobility assistive electronic devices like scooters for folks with disabilities. It also may involve things like street trees, additional protected crossings, hawk signals. So a complete street is generally something that's including something for all users, or at least a broader swath of users than, to Chris's point, just say a sidewalk improvement. Or in the case of the 29th Street project we talked about earlier, likely just bike improvements is what we're looking at. And so we want to differentiate between those two things because our council does.
And I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for being pedantic, but it seems like multimodal could also be vehicles too, whereas active transportation really gets at pedestrians and bikes.
No, that's great. I think, thank you for that. And Chris, let's talk about that. I think it's probably a really helpful distinction.
Yeah, I like that too.
Commissioner Ray, did you have something before we take a quick break?
Yes, I wanted to comment on the two comments. One is, what happened to 18th Street? There was significant momentum in terms of expanding 18th Street east of 136th Avenue all the way down to 192nd. With all of the development going on in that sector, particularly with Section 30 and some of the things going on there with the apartment buildings and HP building out in that area, I'm expecting, I think we could anticipate significant increase in traffic there.
Yeah, 18th Street is still in the TIP document, and it's in multiple phases because it's such a large project. So
right,
we had to break it up into smaller sections. So there's money set aside to start the design phase in the coming years for the 138th to 164th section. And then it starts the ball rolling and gets it moving through the different phases and ultimately towards construction. And then the next phase following that would be the phase from 164th to 192nd.
So we're looking a significant number of years before that's going to happen, it sounds like.
Realistically, you're right. Just if not for nothing else, it's the funding. We just, it's such an expensive project. It takes a long time to implement those large improvements.
Oh, I know. I can tell from, I use that route on occasions. Secondly, can you put up the prioritization, the criteria again? Those, I think there were 8 of them. Yeah. So in looking at these, there's a lot of interactiveness between these that makes this a more complex than just simply scoring them. As an example, if we focused on multimodal, where we got rid of some of the gasoline-powered traffic and even electric-powered traffic, that could reduce some congestion. It could help the climate. So there's a lot of I appreciate where you're going with this. I like the criteria. I'm wondering if you've addressed the interactiveness between a number of these criteria and how one will either enhance or take away from another.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and we struggled with that as well. We did try to not double count. I think that's what you're getting at, is that you could do bicycle improvements in multimodal, but also that could count in congestion reduction as well. And so we made a concerted effort not to double count. And so you'll see the criteria for scoring, we tried to avoid that. I think there might be a little bit of overlap in, like, for example, multimodal and congestion, but we tried to avoid it as much as possible. But definitely something we could look at as we revamp the scoring criteria.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for that, Chris. So looking at our agenda, we did have a short break scheduled from 5 to 5:15. We've gone over that a little bit. If everybody would like to say take about a 9-minute break, we'll look to be back here at 5:20. 5:20, if you guys will be back to commence. Top off the water, let me know. Yeah.
Are we done with the tip presentation?
It's close enough. I was just going to share our next possible touch points with the commission, but we're just looking at 2 more touch points, one in early 2020.
Well, I can do that after the break.
Hey, well, Chris, why don't you, I think can you wrap up in like 2 minutes?
Yeah, no, I'm basically done. I just wanted to share that we'll come back in early 2022 with a draft version of the document, and then we'll get more feedback from the commission, and then we'll come back in spring with a further refined document, and then hopefully get a recommendation from the commission that we could take to city council. That's all I was going to say.
So just 2 very brief points. One of them is Parks wants to put in a multi-mode trail on the BPA right-of-way extending all the way out to Harmony. Should that be on the TIP or not? What's the process by which that happens? And then the final point is your budget stuff is about 10 million a year CapEx. I added up the unfunded stuff is 500 million, so that's 50 years of waiting. I highly recommend you advertise that in big, bold letters. That unfunded stuff is a 50-year backlog. To Commissioner Reyes' point.
And the trail, it's a part of the 18th Street corridor. So when they do improvements to 18th Street, they're working to implement that trail and the power lines. I think that's the trail you're talking about.
Well, it's on Parks' new comp plan. So it wasn't clear that there was a complete articulation between the 2 documents.
Chris, I think.
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, I think we can address that through the description of the 18th Street project.
Yeah,
probably.
Yep. I was going to add that to it.
Chair Payne, and if it's okay with you, I think, and it's okay with the commission, we do have more to get through, and I believe we're scheduled for the community forum at 6:15. So would it be okay if we took a 5-minute break and came back at 5:20 and started? Is everybody okay with a 5-minute break?
No objections here. Anybody else? We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Okay,
We'll be at 5:20. Like we got 5:20 here, maybe a minute past. Everybody back. Bring this meeting back into order. Jumping back onto our agenda. Next, we had Rebecca wanted to speak on our annual review of our handbook documents and a few other key items. Rebecca, the floor is yours, please.
Great, thank you, Chair Payne, and thanks everybody for being willing to take a short break. I am just gonna, for the benefit of new members and sort of as like, hi, we're starting the second year, let's review sort of why we're here and how we work together, as well as some kind of updates on upcoming like work plan items and election of officers, and then like staff has some proposals for how we might improve our processes to work better, both for the commission, but also for the public. And then I want to get your feedback on how the first year went, how we can continue to improve, understand it was, you know, what the way first years are, and we learned a lot. And so I want to have time to get that feedback from you all. So just going to jump in now. Next slide, please, Julie. So quickly, I'm going to go over our enabling ordinance, or the TMC's enabling ordinance, bylaws, and operating procedures. And I'll move through this pretty quick with the suggestion that everybody review their handbook, which contains all of this. Have some high-level overview of the 2022 work plan. It's largely a continuation of projects that you've already either been engaged with or have been made aware that are forthcoming, like Complete Streets projects. But there's some stuff that I also want to make sure you know we heard you on and that we will be bringing before you. We do have upcoming election of officers, and Chair Payne, I apologize, when we talked last, I thought we could do this in January, but I reviewed the bylaws more closely and we need to do it in December. So that's why I thought we could wait till January, but it needs to happen this year. Discuss again some proposed changes and then have that discussion to get your feedback and reflections. Next slide, please. So quick overview, all boards and commissions are created by an enabling ordinance. Essentially, it's an ordinance council adopts that outlines the key provisions of creating a new board or commission or advisory group or whatever. We have approximately 50 citizen oversight committees within the city, and all of them generally are created by an ordinance that outlines their key provisions. So for the TMC, that was adopted on December 16th of 2019. And it is codified in the Vancouver Municipal Code in Title 11, Section 75, Transportation and Mobility Commission. It's also outlined very clearly in your handbook. It's an 11-member commission, 3-year terms with the opportunity to be reappointed for a second term. That 3-year terms are instituted after the staggering of initial terms that we've discussed at length, which needed to happen just so we don't have a full-scale replacement of the entire commission every few years, which would be problematic from an institutional knowledge and just building the capacity of the commission over time. The purpose of the commission is to advise and make recommendations to the city council and or the city manager for the purpose of ensuring that transportation policy and projects adhere to the transportation system plan, the Vancouver strategic plan, and Vancouver's complete streets policy. So I think this is important and kind of ties back to something that I talked about earlier, which was essentially in some areas where we know we have policy priorities, we do not have clear policy direction. So for instance, we do not have a climate action plan adopted yet. I anticipate that we may want to revisit this purpose or at least modify it to include things like the climate action plan, the comprehensive plan, and other plans to provide more policy basis at some point. But right now, per the enabling ordinance, these are the policy documents that we are working in. And obviously, as you know, the TSP is very, very out of date and we're undergoing an update process. So some of what you all are bringing up, which are very, very important points and absolutely relevant, we just don't have that guidance yet, but it is forthcoming. Next slide, please. It says the TMC shall provide recommendations to the city council and city manager on the following: amendments to Title 11. So whenever we propose, when staff bring forward amendments to Title 11 of the Vancouver Municipal Code, we'll bring those to you all for review. the city's transportation system plan, which you're very familiar with, the city's complete streets policy, which this group is also quite familiar with, updates to transportation programs, including the 6-year transportation improvement program, which you just saw a presentation on, as well as other programs, sidewalk management, pavement management, transportation demand management, and our safety, accessibility, and mobility program. And so when Ryan came and did an overview a few months ago of sort of what the different sections within his group, he talked about the folks who are managing these programs and basically what they oversee and how they do their work. We would anticipate bringing to you in a logical order that we can phase out and make sense, more in-depth looks at those various programs and potential and always do that in advance of proposed changes. So we're looking to bring you all more information on those, and you'll see that reflected in the work plan. I have some key priorities for 2022 because I know that there's proposed changes coming in some areas. And then transportation projects in the right of way that exceed $2 million in project costs or have area-wide significance, or other transportation related matters that the council directs us to bring to you. So that's sort of the scope. It obviously has a fairly wide purview over the transportation system and allows the council to direct other items, which we anticipate they will occasionally do. Next slide, please. In terms of your bylaws, it does outline a scope of authority. It's very similar to, it outlaws the scope of authority. It reflects, sort of that broad purpose statement, but just to advise the council. I do want to emphasize, and I've done this before, but I think it's important for all board and commissioners to understand that no member of the commission is authorized to speak for the TMC unless the commission has expressly authorized them to do that. Obviously, all individual members are free to voice their positions on issues, just making it clear they're speaking for themselves as a community member, but not as a representation of the entire TMC, unless of course the TMC specifically asks them to do that in a public setting. We do have officers, a chair and a vice chair. The bylaws go into detail on elections, the terms of serving as an officer, and then the duties of an officer. And I'll actually recap some of that a little later, just prepping you to lead into the election of the officers in December. Next slide, please. Bylaws also talk about when your regular meetings are, which is the first Tuesday of every month. They also address the need for special meetings and how we should notice meetings. There are requirements for public notice of public meetings, of which any meeting of this group is a public meeting. It talks about the order of business. So really that's how your agenda is structured. And Chair Payne, are you wanting me to pause? Oh, no, okay. You're okay, just making sure. That's how your agenda is structured. And then it specifically outlines how action items are moved through a process from introduction to public comment to disposition and voting. And then it also addresses things like what a quorum is, how motions and voting occur. There's a parliamentary procedure cheat sheet in there, which is, I think, probably good to revisit occasionally, especially for folks who maybe are less experienced on boards and commissions. And then the fact that all business of this group is subject to public records. It is a public record and it is subject to public records requests. Next slide, please. So there's some key state law and a bunch of operating procedures. I do want to note there is a new section in your handbook this year titled Open Public Meetings Act. It's a really, I think, good, accessible summary of OPMA and how it impacts members of boards and commissions or appointed members of citizen oversight committees. Tells you how to handle certain things, how to be kind of safe and not open yourself up. And the bottom line is, if you have a question or there's an issue that needs to be addressed and you want to be clear how to not violate the Open Public Meetings Act and you have a question, get in touch with me and Julie and David and we will help you. There's some good resources linked there there as well. And I do want to thank David for putting together a really good, I think, very accessible overview. We've actually integrated that into other boards and commission handbooks as well. We have a practice for how to adopt minutes. Does require a quorum and a majority in favor for approval. We have a statement for how the public should participate we have a policy around participation in meetings for commissioners. So essentially when you're appointed, the council does expect you to show up and participate, no surprise there, and how to deal with excused versus unexcused absences. I note that if someone has 35% unexcused absences in a year or 3 straight, staff is directed to notify the council committee that appointed them per council's direction. And then we do have a public meeting conduct sheet, largely directed at the public, but probably good for all of us as humans in the world, for how we should talk to and respect each other's diverse opinions. And then a set of parliamentary procedures. Again, we've got cheat sheets in there. So y'all do a really good job of it, but for new members, particularly those who maybe haven't sat on a board and commission recently or have a lot of experience, I think that can be helpful. Robert's Rules is notoriously not accessible, and we try to use it as a frame, but not a technical requirement. And so next slide, please. In terms of the 2022 work plan, you all have been briefed by Jennifer Campos previously about the different Complete Streets projects that council identified and funded in the last biennial budget. That includes the Forest Plains Safety and Mobility Project, which you'll get an update on in December, the 112th Avenue Corridor Project, Fort Vancouver Way, and Southeast 34th Street. And so if you have any, we've previously provided pretty in-depth information on the extent and the type of improvements and the process associated with all those projects. We're happy to answer any questions if they come up tonight or provide additional information. Again, the Transportation System Plan update, that is the 20-year vision and policy document that guides transportation investments throughout the city. We're currently in an update process. You will get another update on that in December and anticipate bringing forward a draft to you for consideration for adoption after many series of workshops at the end of 2022. I noted the 6-year tip. And you want to start engaging this group early in our pavement program planning process. So city staff necessarily need to look pretty far out to identify what pavement investments are coming in future years. And so our pavement group does an excellent job of sort of looking at the various criteria that guide pavement investments and putting together draft maps that allow us to look at and consider, are there any projects on there we would want to identify for Complete Streets improvements? Because if, for instance, they're going to be built in 2020, they're going to be paved in 2025, we have to start planning work no later than 2023. So did hear some feedback from a few of you that, you know, it felt like some of the pavement work was baked last time we brought it to you, and that's because it necessarily needs to be fully planned and finalized in advance. So what we'd like to do is start bringing upcoming years, 23 and 24, to you for review so that we can make sure we're getting your input prior to those documents being finalized. And then an overview of safety, accessibility, and mobility funding in the current biennium, which is council directed through the budget process, and a discussion of future projects. We likely will want to bring to this group a set of recommendations for your consideration and feedback on that we can then take the council through the next budget process. I will note that the budget process is exclusively the domain of council, but we do believe they're going to want your input on what should be funded given that we have limited funding, particularly in that safety, accessibility, and mobility project. And I will say the Safety, Accessibility, and Mobility Program generally funds capital improvements for multimodal infrastructure. So in this biennium, it is funding pedestrian crossing improvements in the Forest Plains Corridor. It is funding the Northwest Neighborhoods Connectivity Project. It's funding ADA improvements at Divine and 18th Street, and is contributing to a number of other curb ramp projects, etc. So what we'd like to do is bring that forward to you for discussion heading into the next budget process. Next slide, please. And then Chris showed this, and I just want to reiterate that we're going to try really hard to help frame up what we're talking about when we bring things to you, because you all are seeing things throughout this pipeline. You're seeing things at the high level policy level, transportation system plan. You will start to see things as we initiate new sub-area planning process, we'll be bringing you street recommendations. What are the transportation recommendations for those sub-area plans? We are initiating a new strategic plan process. That is the purview of council explicitly, but we do bring it to groups like the Planning Commission and the TMC for advisory review, which we communicate to council through their adoption process. So you'll start to see things, you're looking at the tip now, and that's an annual thing. And then if you think about this project opportunity bucket, you're seeing projects right now that the opportunity is pavement, and we're doing complete streets in advance of those. We're planning for complete streets. And so you're going to be part of the planning process that will facilitate street changes through the pavement program. We can also, there's also options through the capital program. Chris mentioned 18th Street. That's a very, very large capital project. As we move through the design of that, that will come to you. So that kind of all falls into that project opportunity bucket. And then as you think of analysis and outreach, that's the planning phase. So we are going to be bringing you information on analysis and outreach related to the Fourth Plane Safety and Mobility Project, and asking you to advise on design concepts, not at the engineering stage, but design concepts for how to address changes to that street. There are trade-offs, right? We can't always do everything we want. And so that will be something we will ask this group primarily to weigh in on, is how do we weigh the balance those trade-offs? How do we change the street to meet the stated goals and the policy goals that we are following? And that's all coming up in 2022. So I'm going to be committing to try to do a really good job of helping to frame for this group where we are in this pipeline for any given project, and directing staff to use this graphic. So Chris had the tip highlighted in his presentation. I'd like to do that for future projects so that everybody's clear where we're at. We have the policy phase, we at the tip phase, which is essentially a list. Are we at a project opportunity? Are we like literally designing how the street should look? You all have a pretty wide purview, and we're going to try to frame that in a way that helps you understand what the scope of decision making is. Next slide, please. Want to note election of officers. So here's how we do election of officers for boards of commissions. It works really well in the Planning Commission and for other groups. Elections for this group need to occur at the December meeting. I've listed the role of the chairperson and the vice chairperson here. Would recommend to you all that you take a look at that and consider whether you're interested in filling one of those roles. We do need to have a chair and a vice chair. Our inaugural chair, Mike Payne, has done a wonderful job, has indicated he'd be willing to serve for another year, particularly if that allowed him to mentor someone that could take over after that, but certainly has indicated he's also open to if someone else wants to step up. So take a look at these duties and let us know if that's something that you would want to, that you are interested in. Next slide, please, Julie. And here's the way you let us know. What we don't want is at the December meeting, none of you all to show up and have no idea who might want to serve or not, and start nominating people that may or may not be interested or have time. So here's kind of how we run the process. Next week, I will send out an email to you all that reflects the duties and of each position per the last slide. We'll ask you to send statements of interest that we can distribute to your fellow commissioners if you are interested in serving in those roles. And you need to indicate whether you are interested in serving in one or both. We will then compile, there'll be a deadline for that. So the end of November, right after Thanksgiving, we will compile those statements of interest and we will send them out to you in with the materials or in advance of the December meeting. And then you get up there and it is up to you all to be prepared to address those statements of interest through a process of nomination and eventually voting. So when I pause, please let me know if there are questions on this or if they come up as you're thinking about it. But we found that this is a good way to keep it open, but not keep it so open that it's just confusion on the dais or the virtual dais. And I found that it works well. Next slide.
I'd also just like to throw one thing in there too, if I may, please, Rebecca. If any of you are contemplating or considering running for chair, or volunteering for chair or co-chair, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions as well. I'd be happy to share anything and everything that I've known, learned, and experienced throughout. Like I said, I'm more than happy, but always encourage anyone and everyone to get involved. So reach out if you have to me also if you have any questions. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair Payne, and really appreciate that. I will say, the chair position and the vice chair position do come with some extra time requirements. We meet in advance of each meeting, try to frame up the agenda, anticipate questions, make sure the resources are in place to respond to you all during the meeting. And that's, I will say, as a staff person, extremely helpful for us to be prepared, and something we would hope that we can continue with future chairs and vice chairs. We do this again for other boards and commissions, and it's an effective strategy. Next slide, please. It's probably obvious by now, but I do want to announce publicly that we have made some staffing changes related to the TMC in the past few months. I have emailed you all about this, but I am taking over as the primary staff liaison to the TMC. We have really had to shuffle staff assignments given workload and capacity issues, and so this will free Jennifer Campos up to focus on the several large projects we need to deliver in this biennium. Julie will remain the primary staff support and the person keeping the wheels on the bus. So continue to reach out to her and me. And then Jennifer Campos, Ryan Laposa, and their associated team members will remain the primary technical experts, although obviously we have folks from other either teams in our departments or departments in the city. For instance, Chris Malone, who's here tonight, who will be before you as well. Next slide, please. So I have a couple proposals based on sort of my experience working with boards and commissions to put forward to you all. And these are based on some comments I've received from a number of you about wanting to make our meetings more accessible to the public, and really that the focus of those conversations have been about predictability and people not having, say, to sit through the entire meeting, to wait for community forum to give their input if they don't have time or the ability to do that. So my first proposed change is to implement a time certain for the community forum portion of the meeting. And what I would propose is that we do that at 6:30. And here is my rationale. I believe that your schedule is going to get busier, and we are going to have often more than 2 agenda items. And so what this allows us to do is have 2 workshops at 4 and 5, a break from 6 to 6:30-ish. And then at 6:30, we have a time certain for starting the community forum portion of the meeting. This allows people to just plan to show up. All they have to do is register and show up, or if when we return to in person, show up. But they know when this is, and so you don't have to sit through an entire meeting. Really looking for feedback here. I do know, and we have on other boards and commissions have worked through this issue. Sometimes is 6:30 the right time? And please give me your feedback on that. There's trade-offs to the time. If we do it earlier, I think it's hard for some people who may work 9 to 5 and pick up kids from daycare. I think at 6:30 may not provide great accessibility for some like shift workers, night workers. So that's really something I'd like your feedback on. What I've learned is that a time certain is what matters. That people know they can just show up and talk at a certain time and don't have to sit and sort of listen to everything else if that's not their issue. And then again, this sort of leads into my proposed change would be to break from 6 to 6:30 for every meeting, or from 6:05 to 6:30, depending on when we end the last workshop, but to have a set break for folks to take a break, eat dinner, let their dog out, whatever they need to do, and then come back for the community forum portion. And oftentimes we're going to end up coming back for a third agenda item because we are going to have a busier schedule in 2022 than we have had previously as this group continues to ramp up. Yeah, please go ahead, Commissioner Jackson.
Are you suggesting, would we have a set amount of time for people to make comments? Because I don't mind having a set time that it begins, but if we have, I don't want to be here till 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And, so I totally, great point. Absolutely, we can do that. My experience with the Planning Commission is it's rare to have more than 20 minutes of community forum. I do think, though, if it would be helpful, we could just say maximum 30 minutes. So people can register, you get 3 minutes each, up to 30 minutes. If we have more than 10 people, we can kind of address it. I think that's unlikely. We just may need to be prepared if, I think maybe once a year we have some crazy contentious item, we may need to go longer, but we could deal with that on a one-off and have a general 30 minutes if you think that might be appropriate. Yeah, it looks like I have, and I'll defer to the Chair Payne. It looks like we have Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Herman and potentially Commissioner Rea, or that may just been a thumbs up.
Sure, Commissioner Edwards, I saw your hand up first. Go ahead, please.
I like the idea of having, actually, I think the times you're proposing is good as well, but I like the idea of saying 30 minutes or whatever for public comments. My experience is that, we're usually happy if somebody comments at all. I would just say if people are registering and it does look like we're going to have more, that would be a month that I'd prefer us not to have 3 sessions, right? And then that lets us bleed over if we decide we want to go ahead and we know we have that contentious thing coming up, or, and it just gives us some flexibility, but the rest of the time it gives us some predictability.
No, that is an excellent, yeah, I love that suggestion. Only thing I would say is, can I commit to just doing our very best to meet that? Sometimes we have council deadlines and I won't be able to shuffle a third agenda item, but 99% of the time, I think we can do it. Just do our best and know if we didn't do it, it was because we couldn't to meet some other timeline.
Well, certainly, hopefully we would understand that as well, right? that whatever's being presented to us needs to be presented to us today, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that makes a lot of sense. So maybe if folks are comfortable with that, we would max 30 minutes. And if we know it's going to go longer, we would just not have a third agenda item. And I want to just say my dog has come downstairs. He's very old. So if you see him, he's just wandering around.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman, did you have some input?
Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts, Rebecca, regarding having the community forum portion at the end of the meeting rather than at the front end of the meeting.
Yeah, we've worked on this in other boards and commissions, and 4 p.m. is a very hard time, I think, for folks to show up to testify. I think it's just, if you have kids, school pickup, daycare, it is just a really challenging for a lot of folks. And so we have found we get greater participation, at least on the Planning Commission. We found greater participation when we've had it later, generally.
Another input to that too, Commissioner Herman, that we had in a discussion is that most of our speakers that work for the city are, also on the clock, when they come to our meetings. Not that that's a requirement, but it's also a consideration as well. So we'd like to let them get in and out. Did anyone else have any comments on the subject? Commissioner Rea? Wrong button.
Wrong button, sorry. I like having the workshop portion early and the hearing, the public hearing late. I'm in complete agreement with Rebecca on this. I'm drawing from my experience on the City Planning Commission, where we had a similar format and it worked really well. We got better participation, I should say, when we had the hearing portion in the evening.
Yeah, and I will say that is how we would work to structure it. The nuance of this group is that, right, you have public hearings where you're taking a formal vote less frequently than the planning commission. So sometimes we're just going to need that third agenda item for another workshop. But in the case where we do have a hearing, we would put it after the community forum, because there will be a public testimony piece of every hearing as well. Community forum is for folks to come and say whatever they want to say to you all on every topic. In an actual hearing, there would be a presentation. We would then open up the public hearing portion. People would testify on that item, and we come back for additional discussion and an eventual vote. So
Yes.
that's how I would propose to structure it.
Double thumbs up.
It looks like Commissioner Williams has a comment.
Commissioner Williams, yes, please.
One thing I would suggest, by moving the comments to this, 6:30, with the anticipation that people will kind of drop in then, I think we need to revise the preamble, which we do right now at the beginning, because much of it is targeted to those people who haven't tuned in yet. And I would also further suggest there's some of the preamble, I don't even know why we read it week or month after month after month. I think it could be boilerplate on the TMC webpage and shave just a few precious minutes off of our agenda.
You read my mind. The first note on my tonight was, Julie, we need to change the preamble. We need to break it up into a quick, 2 sentences, who we are, what we're doing to start the meeting. And then, we'll take the majority of it, and it will be the introduction to the community forum portion of the meeting. And we'll have a separate thing for the public hearing piece.
We'll just go ahead and get rid of this then.
We'll get you a new one.
Just,
Absolutely agree, Commissioner.
Anybody else have any comments on the current topic of the agenda structure on the meetings, public forum?
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Commissioner Ruggles.
Rebecca, perfect. Thank you. Rebecca, did you have some more bullet points on there that you wanted to address on that?
I actually like to jump to the next slide, if that works for everyone. So here's where I want to just open it up for discussion, questions, reflections. I did want to share, sort of as my own preamble to this. I've talked to many of you individually about the first year, and have tried, and I hope that it's been clear that we've tried to kind of implement a continuous improvement structure as we've worked through this year. I know it hasn't always been super clear and has sometimes been frustrating, and I want to make sure that we're improving, and it feels like a high value use of your time and a high impact use of your time, and it makes sense for you all, but as well as for the public. And so some of my reflections on the TMC year one, based on those conversations, is that there are different levels of detail and specificity of materials that various commissioners want. And there are some of you who really want to dig into the specifics, and some of you who, understandably do not have time to read, 500-page documents. And so I think where we're trying to strike the balance is to provide staff materials that are clearer, and provide clear summaries in memo format where appropriate, and then attachments that allow people to dig in at those different levels that they may or may not have time to, or may not have time to do. Yeah. And I want to be clear that there is a baseline expectation as part of your appointment by council that people are reading materials, but I think that staff can do a better job of saying, here are the materials that provide, you really should look at. And if you want a lot more detail, background documents, that kind of thing, here's a set of attachments that you can go into. So I guess that's both an observation and potentially a proposal. But just wanted to reflect back that we have a lot of, I think, a pretty extensive range of what people have time and are looking for, and the level of detail they want to get into. My second observation is that I know that there has been a really amazing investment by many of you to get sort of get up to speed on best practices in transportation. And first of all, I just want to thank you for those of you who have done that. I know several of you have, we sent out articles that you all have found, opportunities for continuous learning. And we are really deeply appreciative that folks care enough and take the time to do that. I also want to emphasize that the intent of council in creating this was to create a diverse group. And the reason to do that was to bring a diversity of lived experiences and experiences with the transportation system. And if all you have time to do is read our materials and bring your lived experiences, that is okay. That is a great service to the community that fulfills your role that's expected by council. And staff are the technical experts, and we can answer questions and provide follow-up information related to those best practices and those technical details. It's awesome if you have time and can do that. And I don't want this to be so burdensome that some people just can't participate. Your lived experience and the time you dedicate is enough. I also want to note that if you look, I've got a lot of feedback from a lot of people on the collaboration compact. They frankly didn't feel it was necessary and thought that essentially just proceeding with the various procedures and bylaws and practices we have in place would be good. So you will notice that I've talked to the chair about this, that in the current version of the handbook, the collaboration compact is not there. We simply are just moving forward we're proposing to move forward with the framework we have now. And if we need to augment that in some way going forward, of course we can. And I think, I want to recognize that staff's intent with that was like to try to put in place a more accessible process. And I think that we've done that anyway. We're a pretty accessible group. Folks feel comfortable talking and sharing and engaging. And I'm open to anything that we need to do to continue to augment that sense of this is an accessible process and group. It just seems like the collaboration compact wasn't doing that. And so open to feedback there, but that's what the chair and I are proposing. And then lastly, I've talked to a number of you. I do think a retreat would be really, really valuable. Mario has experience with these when we would do like half-day Saturday retreats once a year, where we, do some things like this, but also have broader discussions about what's upcoming, how the process should be shaped, get information from other groups about like broad trends that are occurring in the city related to population growth and the built environment and that kind of thing. And I'd really like to do that with this group. And I would propose that we will get the most value out of it when we can do it in person, when we can kind of build that collegial relationships, those relationships where we can't talk about anything substantive related to the TMC, but we can have that, water cooler conversation that's like, how was your vacation? How was your dog? I think that we have missed that as a group just due to COVID. And so I'd propose that we do a retreat when it's safe to meet in person. And also obviously that we return to, we start for this group in-person meetings when it's safe to do so. And we try to do those. So we have, the dinner break, when we have in-person meetings, the break will be dinner in a room together where you can't talk about the TMC at all. But we can kind of connect with each other as human beings. So those are my sort of year one reflections and sort of the proposals that have come out of those. I wanted to now open the floor for you all and ask, for additional reflections and proposed adjustments. We want to make it as useful as we can and accessible as we can for all of you and for the public.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'd like to actually just start off real quick with a brief comment on the collaboration compact and the discussions that surrounded that. We've got a great group of people here, and the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, are never ending. And I think that as long as each of us embrace that, there's really, I think that's going to cover itself. We're here for the same purpose. We're all volunteering our time, and I think we're all, forward thinking on the same agenda. So, that's kind of why we agreed that the collaboration compact was, I think, maybe taking a little bit away from what we're already doing. So that was my supporting comment in that removal. also to, second that in-person retreat. I haven't seen David's cat for a while. We kind of miss him as well. But with that said, there is a personal aspect of it that I look forward to being able to sit down with each of you at some point. So I do appreciate everybody's commitment to this, your volunteer work, and look forward to another year going forward. With that said, I believe Commissioner Jackson had your hand up. Am I correct?
I was just wondering if I can ask a question about something in the handbook, or if I'm just supposed to talk about what you presented here, or?
Floor is wide open, whatever
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so in the handbook, I was hoping maybe you could give us an example, and possibly you can't because I know we're a brand new commission, but it says that the 4 important pieces for the transportation planning are the council, the planning commission, the parking advisory commission, and us. So I'm just wondering, how do you see that integrating? Because when I went into the planning commission handbook, I didn't see any relation, any comment about us. So I wasn't sure how will that work?
Great question, and appreciate you doing the digging there. Julie, maybe make a note about, because we are in the process, we do updates to the Planning Commission handbook annually as well. So let's make a note that we need to identify this. So here is sort of the high level overview, and we have a flow chart that we need to probably look at updating, but can share with you all. But there are overlaps between different boards and commissions, particularly at this level. So this group is the primary group that oversees the transportation system plan and will make a recommendation to council on the details and substantive stuff within it. The transportation system plan, though, is also adopted into the comprehensive plan by reference, and thus the Planning Commission has to take action on it because they are the primary group that oversees the comprehensive plan. So they will receive, not nearly in the level of detail as you all, and frankly, not nearly in the level of detail as council, but they will receive occasional updates to get their advisory review on it, to ensure that they feel it sufficiently integrates with the broader comprehensive plan policies to be able to adopt it by reference based on their criteria for doing so. So that's one relationship. Here's another one. When we have a project that is in a active parking management area, so an area where we enforce regulations around parking in the right of way, whether that be meters or time limits or neighborhood parking programs. We have projects in those areas that has operational impacts on our parking group, and their citizen oversight body for operational considerations is the Parking Advisory Committee. So there is a scenario where something goes to this group and to that group. You may make different recommendations to council, and that's fine. There's also a scenario where something goes to this group and the PC, and you may make different recommendations to council, and that's okay. I haven't yet thought of a scenario where it goes to all 3 and you all 3 could make different recommendations to council, but that's probably possible. We have to make sure that we, based on each group's purpose and scope, we're taking it to all of the groups that need to see it, whatever the item is. Does that help?
That does help. And I don't even know if the Parking Advisory has a handbook, because I don't remember ever getting one. So maybe they don't have one. I don't even know if they're meeting right now. So, but mostly I just was trying to get an idea how, so we won't be working with them. They'll do their own thing, and then staff would come back and say, perhaps Planning Commission doesn't really like what the outcome you guys came up with, or?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think that
would there be a scenario where you would see, say, 2 of us working with 2 of them as a subcommittee, or is there any?
There could be a scenario like that. I think given our current staff capacity right now, that's probably unlikely because we just don't have that much capacity to staff that kind of stuff. I would say I think what we would do is if we got like wildly conflicting recommendations, we'd try to do some back and forth between the groups, and we may bring, say, the chair of the planning commission to participate in a presentation to this group along with staff to articulate their position, or vice versa. I think that is likely how we would do it. There is not a template there or a black and white rule for this, but generally we would want to try to take at least corresponding, if not fully aligned, recommendations to council to help inform their decision making.
Okay, because I just didn't, when I was on parking advisory for 8.5 years, and I never remember like having a discussion that had involved planning commission. And in retrospect, it kind of seems like that should have overlapped a little bit. So I'm just kind of curious how that would work.
Yeah, and I think the distinction between different groups is as the city has formalized their boards and commissions process, and there was a whole effort led out of the city manager's office to formalize and standardize different, so that you don't have a wildly different experience on one board and commission than you do on another, which maybe what some people have experienced. That there's some formalization to it, and as part of that, we've started to work through what's the purview of this group, what's the purview of that group, where might it overlap. I've never managed the parking advisory committee, so I'm not sure about their supporting and materials, but I do know essentially over the last 3 years, I've been part of these discussions to try to figure out exactly how things fit together.
Okay.
There is also, just for all of your knowledge, talk about the creation of potentially a housing commission, which would have potentially significant overlap with the planning commission, and potentially some with this group as well. And so we'll have to navigate that. Yeah, thank you for the great question.
Commissioner Ruggles, sorry, I was on mute. Commissioner Ruggles, go ahead.
That's okay, it's one you recognize. Rebecca, thank you so much. I just wanted to say, as one of those people that's passing on lots of opportunities, that the idea of the lived experience versus the transportation technical expertise, that the technical expertise was never what I was after. And this relates to the collaboration compact. This is my first experience on a commission. I was seeking to identify undergirding values. And so that's what I wanted to inform us, as well as great ideas and innovation and best practices, especially at these really intense times that are happening around the country and around the world. And I realized that we don't have this climate action plan yet, and we also don't have the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan yet. But I do have to say that disaffected people often feel excluded, and with all due respect to Commissioner Rea, may not feel passionate about the process, but they deserve inclusion and informed consent about what will affect them. And it's up to us to reach them. Or when I say us, whatever that outreach mechanism is, because we have to consider that affected population in order to make the best possible recommendations to City Council. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hear you, and I totally hear you, and I don't disagree. I will just say staff are constrained by the policy direction and policy framework we operate in, which is what is adopted by our council. We cannot start articulating certain values or policies that have not been adopted by our council. We operate at the will of the council. And so I am constrained in that way. I think a lot of good work is coming, a lot of good work has been done. And I think, sharing resources that are helpful to you is absolutely appropriate. And that's been, I will be sharing more like learning opportunities as they arise. But I want to be clear for everyone that if you don't have the time or capacity in your life to take advantage of those, that's okay. Your lived experience is enough, and we can we can bring you up to date on best practices. I'll also say, and there's not a universal agreement on what best practices are. And so I need to be careful that we bring forward, again, what's been the direction of our council and leadership to this group, because again, that's the framework I operate in. I do want to say that I totally agree that it is the imperative of the staff running projects to do outreach that is inclusive and engages different people and provides access to decision making that has not previously been part of public processes. That is a clear direction from our council, and that is on us to do.
Thank you. And can I just add, Rebecca, isn't Smart Streets also, or Complete Streets, part of Smart Growth America?
Complete Streets as a program is, and it definitely is. Our policy is written specifically for the city and is City of Vancouver specific.
Are they not connected at all?
They are not formally connected, no. We adopted our own Complete Streets policy. It's certainly based off their work. I mean, the best practices that come out of that, absolutely. But there's no formal connection between our Complete Streets policy and Smart Growth America.
Commissioner Herman, did you have something before we go to our community forum?
I do, real quick. I really appreciate the reflections of the TMC. I think one of the things that I struggle with as a transportation planner is I don't see the fruits of my labor, right? I make these big, large legislative decisions, and it's always the engineers that cut the ribbon or the elected officials. And it'd be nice to have some feedback to say, this is a project that we had a direct result in as part of our ongoing process.
I so understand that on an existential level. And so I want to say thank you for that. I do think for this group, you know, the transportation system plan, the impacts of that will be felt, you know, in both the short and the long term. And sometimes we won't know it, right? That policy work in the transportation system plan will lead to upgraded street standards. And every time a street gets built, every time a development happens where they have to do a street frontage improvement, that new standard will be reflected. We are going to have to look more short-term projects though, you know, where you see that tangible. And I'd say, so please dig in on the policy side, which Matt, you know, like you know, we won't see the full impacts of for a long time, but you know, the impact or the feedback and the participation you all provide in the Complete Streets planning projects, those will get built in the next 4 years, likely, right? Some will be funded for construction in the next biennium. And you'll be able to see those and hopefully go use those streets in a way that feels safer and more accessible for everyone. So I think one of the benefits of this group and one of the I think just great things about sort of the way your purview is structured is you're going to get both. You're going to get the policy side, but you will see more direct results. So I hope that resonates, Matt, but I totally understand. I'm a long-range planner, so I get it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Commissioner Williams, we have about a minute left. Let's, if you got something short and sweet.
Yeah, quick one. I think there should be something in the workbook about handbook about being explicit that the meeting's agenda is driven by, you know, the staff and not by the commission. But having, because there was, to me, there was much confusion about that. But, you know, there might be some comment about how, you know, the commission can help shape, possibly propose agenda kind of items. The last one, I was looking through some of the things, and there was I think it was for the in-person meetings, and there was, you know, mention of a Pledge of Allegiance. And I got to thinking that, let's say I were a Canadian national, that might make me feel very uncomfortable. I wonder why it's even in there. Unless you want to say that you must be a US citizen in order to be part of this commission, which would also be weird.
Well, I not to interject to that, but I think everybody that's representing the Vancouver City Transportation Mobility Commission should be a member of Vancouver City in some way, shape, or form. But not to argue that with you, I do understand and appreciate what you meant by that, Ken. To further emphasize our conversation earlier today and staying with our agenda and our dependability on our community forum. It is 6:15. I do see a few people that have shown up here to speak in our community forum that were not here in the meeting earlier, so I'm going to only reread one paragraph of the preamble this evening prior to opening this up to the community. When you are called, please make sure your phone or your microphone is unmuted, your video is on so your face can be seen during your testimony. At that time, state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes for your comments. And at the conclusion of your 3 minutes, please mute yourself and turn your camera back off as we prepare for the next speaker. If you are providing the formal recommendations of a neighborhood association or any other group, please tell us when the association voted on this matter, how many people were for and against the matter. With that said, Julie, if you would please introduce our community speakers this evening.
Yeah, so we have 3 people who registered. I know I've seen 2 of them who've joined. So let's see. First up, we'll start with Robert Singleton. Are you still on the line? Yes, looks like you are. If you are, unmute, turn your video on. You can go ahead. You'll have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. Good evening, members of the Transportation and Mobility Commission. My name is Robert Singleton, and I'm the Government Partnerships Manager for BIRD, the bike and scooter share company covering the Pacific and Pacific Northwest. I'm speaking with you today to encourage you to support more micromobility options in the city of Vancouver, as they are an extremely cost-effective way to get people out of their cars and encourage greater use of bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Unlike investments in mass transit, parking, or widening of roads and highways, a hybrid scooter and bike share system could be implemented at absolutely no cost to the city, directly resulting in the reduction of tens of thousands of car trips annually. The data is clear. Roughly 40% of just scooter trips directly replace either single occupancy car trips or trips taken through a ride-hailing service like Uber or Lyft. Furthermore, we typically engage in revenue sharing with our community partners, with those funds ideally being spent on developing more bike and pedestrian infrastructure, which in turn leads to even more ridership and a feedback loop that we like to refer to as the virtuous cycle. BIRD now operates in over 330 cities worldwide across 4 continents, despite having only started in 2017. We have both shared e-bikes and scooters and are planning to expand our service area throughout the Pacific Northwest in the coming year. We also operate vehicles in nearby Portland, with the hopes of expanding to all nearby cities and smaller communities with as few as 10,000 people. As such, we'd love to operate in Vancouver and would be happy to support the process of your city adopting a similar program. We can provide examples of ordinances from other cities, permitting schemes, service level agreements, model regulations, and even RFP and RFI templates. So please consider myself a resource and the principal point of contact for BIRD should you be interested. I'm sure the commission staff will be able to share my contact information if you'd like to see that. So once again, thank you for your time this evening and for your service on this public commission.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Don Steinke.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay. I'm just going to scrap almost everything I was planning to say because I want to second what Robert Singleton just said. I had a great experience riding Max in Portland about 2 years ago. And it was a crowded rush hour on Max. And there's a woman sitting there with a scooter between her legs. And I asked her about it. She said, well, she's going to get off at the Hollywood stop. And then she takes her electric scooter and goes the last mile or 2 home up somewhere around 39th Avenue, 33rd, I don't know, somewhere in that neighborhood. And she said she had previously tried to do bicycle, but during rush hour, it was way too crowded. And that seemed like an awesome remedy to incorporate, the last mile and the first mile. And so I really support that sort of thing. And if we had complete streets, that would even be more viable. So I support complete streets. And regarding parking, which I just heard talked about, in the year 1905, the mindset of people in America is that you had cities and then you took trolleys to nearby cities or light rail to nearby cities such as the Springwater Corridor and so on in Portland. And then all of us, within 10 years, all of a sudden, and before that, during that time, people owned the streets. Well, by the year 1925, cars own the streets, and the more parking we provide, the more domination we give to the auto industry and against people. And so I support. I don't know what the parking is a huge issue, and but I would like to see transit and not spend money on parking, but try to drive people into transit so that we don't need to dedicate the streets to the cars. And the city of Vancouver has directed staff to reduce emissions about 50% by 2030 or sooner. I urge you to support that plan. That means by next year we should burn 10% less gasoline than this year, and the following year reduce the remaining consumption levels 10% of what's remaining, and so on every year with declining consumption values. That's the tall order. According to the latest IPCC report, if we do that, we will have a 50% chance of keeping global warming down to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid some of the worst impacts. Thank you very much. Appreciate your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, last person who had registered was Chase Leo. I didn't see him joined, so he may not have made it onto the call tonight.
Chase, if you're with us, please feel free to turn on your microphone or camera or both right now. Yeah, I don't see him, Julie.
Yeah, well, that was all I had.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Don. As chairman of this commission, I in no way, shape, or form am trying to promote any specific brand or idea, but I was fortunate enough to be in Seattle for the Seahawks game last Monday, and we were transported around town for 2 days on scooters, and I thought it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. So with that said, if you haven't tried it, do. Yeah, definitely. So with that said, I guess that completes our community forum. Is there anyone else at this time that had anything that they wanted to add? Nobody rushed me. Rebecca, do you have anything that you would like to say in closing?
Just wanted to thank y'all again for a great first year and sticking with it. I know it wasn't always pretty or easy, but this is what it means to be a citizen appointee, and we'll continue to improve and work together. So just appreciate your ongoing collaboration. And Chris Malone sent me an email and said to please send any additional thoughts or feedback on the TIP project to either me or him, and we'll make sure it gets into the list of things to consider as we update. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a closing, I want to thank the new commission members for your service, for volunteering and stepping up, and for those that are returning, I appreciate you equally as much. Thanks, everybody. Have a great month, and I hope to see a long list of volunteers for some officer positions next month. Have a great month.